What life was really like during the Great Depression. If the 1920s were the age of glamour and jazz, the Roaring Twenties, where every American confidently believed poverty had been defeated, the 1930s that followed were quickly dubbed the Dirty Thirties. Just weeks after the Black Tuesday event in 1929, the American dream shattered, plunging millions into extreme unemployment and poverty. Today, we're taking a journey back to this harsh yet incredibly resilient period to truly understand how Americans lived and survived the worst crisis in history. The crisis context: a financial tsunami and social collapse. The global Great Depression, which lasted from 1929 to 1933, began with a financial shock right here in the United States, then the world's largest economy. The shattering of the American dream, Black Tuesday. The Great Depression is officially considered to have begun with the stock price decline on September 4, 1929. Before 1929, much of the profit from the economic boom of the 1920s was invested in financial speculation, particularly in the stock market. People and businesses alike borrowed heavily to invest, believing that stock prices could only rise. The peak of the chaos was Black Tuesday on October 29, 1929. On that single day, 16 million shares were traded on Wall Street. Stock prices plummeted uncontrollably, falling so fast that the electronic ticker tape system couldn't even keep up with the updates. Thousands of investors lost their entire life savings. The collapse triggered widespread panic. The blind optimism vanished. Despite attempts to calm the public, confidence in the financial system was severely shaken. Banking crisis and the unemployment catastrophe. The financial shock quickly led to the unraveling of the banking system. The American banking system at that time was extremely fragile, lacking deposit insurance and direct access to the Federal Reserve (FED). In the first few years of the 1930s, approximately 9,000 banks in the U.S. failed. By 1933, half of the nation's 25,000 banks had closed. Billions of dollars in deposits were frozen in non-operational banks. The unemployment rate skyrocketed, reaching a terrifying peak of 25% of the population. This meant that roughly 13 to 15 million Americans were completely jobless by 1933. For minority groups such as African Americans, the unemployment rate was often much higher, approaching 50%. Just imagine what fathers and husbands, the breadwinners of their families who may have previously held important corporate positions, had to do just to find food for their wives and children. Sometimes they were reduced to scavenging for food in garbage cans. The crisis wasn't just about losing money, it was about losing their self-respect and their role within the family. Hope for finding new work was incredibly slim. Stories tell of a small job posting for only 6 positions attracting the interest and applications of over 15,000 people. In their utter desperation, many men became hobos. They accepted a life of wandering and homelessness, illegally climbing onto freight trains. Their sole objective was the hope of finding even a small chance, a temporary job in a distant place. Life on those trains was harsh, full of risk and uncertainty. Even for those who were luckier and still had jobs, life wasn't easy. They had to witness drastic wage cuts, sometimes up to 60%. Purchasing power plummeted. Everything became more expensive relative to their ability to pay. Shantytowns and international crisis. The sight of long lines of people waiting for free soup from soup kitchens became common in most cities. Homeless people erected makeshift tents and shacks using old planks and corrugated iron. These shantytowns were bitterly named Hoovervilles, after President Herbert Hoover, in office 1929 to 1933. Hoover failed because he believed firmly in self-reliance and was slow to use governmental power to respond to the crisis. International trade dropped by more than 50%. The total value of world trade had fallen to just 1/3 of its level 5 years prior by 1933. The U.S. Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 sharply increased tariffs on over 20,000 types of imported goods. This action sparked a global trade war as at least 25 countries imposed retaliatory tariffs on American goods, causing U.S. exports to fall by nearly 65% in just 3 years. The economic failure created conditions for extremist movements to rise. In Germany, the unemployment rate rose nearly 30%, paving the way for Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party to seize power in 1933. Daily life and resilience, the pillars of home. In the harsh environment of the Great Depression, the family home became the most crucial sanctuary, the last fortress where everyone worked together to weather the storm. The silent hero, the role of the mother. During that dark period when men, the former financial pillars, suffered the pain of job loss and lost self-respect, the mother stepped up to the front lines. She became the primary pillar in managing the household. Her responsibility was heavier than ever. She had to run everything on an unprecedentedly tight budget. Her task was to make something out of nothing, to creatively find new ways for every member to be fed, clothed, and kept warm. The resourcefulness and endurance of women during this era are truly admirable. Let's reminisce about the daily tasks of a 1930s housewife, tasks that demanded extraordinary strength and sacrifice. Wash day, Monday. Monday was typically laundry day. Even though washing machines existed, they were a luxury. For the vast majority of families, especially those struggling, washing clothes by hand on a washboard remained the common method. Imagine the tremendous effort required scrubbing every piece of clothing. After washing, clothes were hung outside, maximizing sunlight and wind to dry them. An energy-saving practice that also left the clothes with a pleasant countryside scent. Ironing day, Tuesday. The next day, Tuesday, was often ironing day. Instead of convenient electric irons, many women still had to use heavy cast iron irons. They weren't plugged in. They had to be heated on a coal or wood stove. Just lifting that heavy iron and skillfully maneuvering it to flatten clothes without scorching them required carefulness and seasoned experience. Just these two small tasks, washing and ironing, show us the difficulty and skill of the women of that time, maximizing savings and amazing creativity. In a time when money became unbelievably scarce, things that were once common and readily available suddenly became luxuries people couldn't dare to dream of. From the smallest details of life, people had to find every way possible to cut costs. Think about it. Getting a haircut or having hair styled became too expensive, so people often cut each other's hair or opted for the simplest styles possible. Routine healthcare was drastically cut. Regular dental checkups? Almost impossible. Even seeing a doctor for a minor illness had to be carefully considered. Health now relied mostly on self-care, shared folk remedies, or simply toughing it out. Even childbirth required saving money. Hospital delivery costs were high, so some women chose to give birth at home. They sought help from experienced midwives or relatives, accepting the risk to save every penny because in those circumstances, saving was the top priority. The resourcefulness of people during this era reached its peak in repair and reuse. Clothing and shoes were no longer things one could casually buy new. They had to be used thoroughly, carefully patched time and time again. This is when creativity reached the height of desperation. Can you believe that in extreme situations, some families had to patch worn-out shoes by cutting rubber pieces from old, unused car tires? The image of rough rubber crudely stitched to the sole is not just creativity. It's an expression of desperation and the effort to cling to life, refusing to give up. Even once well-off families had to get used to new concepts. For example, children wearing hand-me-downs from older siblings. Wearing used clothes could make children feel sad, even ashamed in front of their friends. But in that era, personal pride had to take a back seat, giving way to the family's existence and survival. The most important thing was having something to wear, not wearing something stylish or fashionable. Sharing warmth and shelter. Facing harsh winters, heating the entire house was a huge cost. What was their solution? Instead of heating the whole house, families focused on warming only a single room. This was often the living room with a fireplace or the kitchen with heat from the stove. The entire family would gather together in that warm room, talking and doing activities together to share warmth and save energy. They used every burnable fuel source possible. Sometimes firewood gathered from the forest, coal if they could afford it, or even dried corn cobs. In an effort to save costs and especially to support each other, many families and relatives decided to live together under one roof. Multiple generations living together helped them share the burden of living expenses. Those with jobs shared their wages. The unemployed handled housework, childcare, or went scavenging for food and fuel. Living together not only reduced the financial burden, but also strengthened family bonds, serving as a huge source of encouragement. The thriftiness, resourcefulness, silent sacrifice of mothers and wives, and the efforts of every family member during that period are undeniable living proof of the traditional values of hard work, self-reliance, and the extraordinary coping abilities of the American people. Do these stories bring back any memories for you? Perhaps your grandmother's resourcefulness, your mother's hard work, or memories of your family gathering in one warm room during winter? Please share with us in the comments below. Food scarcity and ingenuity, scarcity and creativity. If we talk about the biggest challenges in daily life in 1930s America, the story of food is certainly one of the most haunting. Food became scarce for many people. The issue was no longer about eating well or poorly, but simply about having enough to eat. Difficult meals and cabbage soup. Things we consider very familiar today, like fresh meat and fresh vegetables, were often beyond the means of most families during that time. Housewives had to learn how to stretch meals. This meant using cheap, readily available ingredients to make a meal larger and sufficient for everyone. Cabbage soup became a symbol of Great Depression meals. It was called the national dish. Cabbage was a cheap, easy-to-grow vegetable that could be cooked into a big pot of soup for the whole family, helping to fill hungry bellies. Besides cabbage soup, housewives maximized creativity. They learned to make casseroles or one-pot meals. These dishes were usually simple, using beans, potatoes, pasta, and a little bit of meat, if available, to create a filling meal. Examples include chili, macaroni and cheese, because it was cheap, easy to make, and provided enough energy. Or chipped beef on toast was also a way to turn a small amount of meat into a dish for many people. Self-sufficiency gardens and community help. To cope with food shortages, growing vegetables in the home garden was no longer a hobby, but became an extremely important task, a necessity to ensure the family had food. Every vacant piece of land around the house was utilized for planting. Scarcity not only promoted individual effort, but also fostered a community spirit. In some towns and cities, local organizations converted unused lots into community thrift gardens. The goal was to give those without land a place to grow crops. Food from these community gardens helped many people. Looking back at old cookbooks from this period, we are amazed by the creativity and the ability to fully utilize every available ingredient. They invented recipes that might seem very strange today. There were cookie recipes made only from lard, sugar, and flour. Or buttered cucumber pickles, a unique way to prepare cucumbers. Resourcefulness was also seen in small details, such as pie crusts made from crushed cornflakes crumbs instead of using entirely more expensive flour. Eating in shifts in the potluck spirit. The most haunting thing, which showed the extreme difficulty of this era most clearly and painfully, is the story that families were forced to eat in shifts, or rotational meals. Try to imagine, to ensure everyone got food, but with extremely limited supplies they had to share. Some family members would eat on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, while others, perhaps siblings, would eat on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Maybe, if they were lucky enough to have a little extra, the whole family would share one meal on Sunday. This meant there were days you had to sit and watch your dearest loved ones go hungry while you ate, or vice versa. That kind of suffering, compassion, and helplessness must have been incredibly difficult emotionally. However, even in the darkest times, the community spirit was a warming fire for the soul. Shared meals, often called potlucks, became very common. They were usually organized by churches, charities, or simply neighbors. Each family contributed even just a small amount of food they had, bringing it to share with everyone. Potlucks were not only a way for people to have a more filling meal, but also a cheap form of entertainment, an opportunity for people to meet, chat, and encourage each other. These shared meals strengthened solidarity and neighborly affection. Are you still with us on this nostalgic journey? Leave a yes in the comments section to let us know you're enjoying it. The Dust Bowl and the Okie migration, the Dust Bowl disaster. The economic hardship in the U.S. was compounded by a long and devastating environmental disaster. The origin of the ecological disaster. The Dust Bowl, also known as the Dirty Thirties, was a series of severe dust storms and droughts that swept across the Great Plains region. This disaster resulted from a combination of severe drought and flawed farming practices. In the preceding decade, farmers had aggressively plowed the land, tilling the topsoil too deeply and destroying nearly all the native grasses, whose deep root systems held the soil and water. The most severe and prolonged drought in history hit the Great Plains in the 1930s, leaving 80% of the U.S. under extreme drought conditions by 1934. The brittle topsoil, lacking vegetation to hold it fast, was left vulnerable. Strong winds blew this topsoil into massive dust clouds. These black dust clouds, known as a black blizzard or black roller, sometimes traveled as far as the East Coast, reaching communities like New York and Washington, D.C. They reduced visibility to near zero for days on end. This event affected about 100 million acres of land in the panhandle regions of Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas. Humanitarian crisis and the wave of migration. The Dust Bowl disaster exacerbated the woes of the Great Depression. More than 30 million hectares of farmland were severely damaged. Hundreds or thousands of local residents died from suffocation due to smoke and dust, especially the elderly and children. The Dust Bowl caused the largest migration in U.S. history. Tens of thousands of farm families were forced to abandon their farms. About 2.5 million people left the Plain States by 1940. Of those, about 200,000 migrated to California. These migrants were often called derogatory nicknames like Okie, referring to those from Oklahoma. They were forced to work as seasonal farm laborers for extremely meager wages, around 75 cents to $1.25 per day. They lived in makeshift shacks with poor sanitation, facing discrimination and oppression from landowners. Their desperate lives were truthfully depicted by novelist John Steinbeck in classics like The Grapes of Wrath, 1939. Additionally, the iconic photographs of photographer Dorothea Lange, especially the image Migrant Mother, captured the suffering, resilience, and hope of the migrants, drawing national attention. Light in the darkness, culture, and escape. When life revolved solely around finding enough to eat and wear, entertainment became a luxury. However, humans always possess the extraordinary ability to find joy and light even in the darkest times. The dominance of radio and frugal entertainment. Going to the movies became a luxury that most people could no longer afford. Consequently, more than a third of movie theaters across the U.S. were forced to close due to lack of audiences. But when they couldn't go to the theater, they turned to another much more popular and accessible form of entertainment, the radio. The old radio, with its sometimes static-filled sound, became the center of many homes in the 1930s. It was the primary source of entertainment, running continuously throughout the day. During the day, the radio served housewives who listened to soap operas. These dramatic stories of love and family helped them temporarily forget their worries. In the evening, this was perhaps the most sacred moment of the day. The entire family gathered around the radio. They listened to the news, enjoyed a comedy show for hearty laughter, or a lively live music performance. The moment the whole family sat together sharing a single entertainment experience created strong bonds. Interactive games and swing music. If they weren't listening to the radio, families could choose other forms of at-home entertainment. Playing board games became very popular. Board games were a cheap form of entertainment that could be played repeatedly and, importantly, required the participation of many people. One of the most famous games born during this period was Monopoly. The interesting and somewhat ironic thing is that this game appeared precisely during the hardest years, when money was the scarcest thing. Yet, Monopoly allowed players the freedom to buy, sell, build property, and own hotels and famous streets using vast amounts of money. Perhaps Monopoly was a way for people to temporarily escape the harsh reality. Besides at-home entertainment, there were affordable public amusements. Mini-golf became a real craze in the 1930s. The cost per game was only 25 to 50 cents, a very affordable price. Music also played an important role as a spiritual escape. Jazz, created by African Americans, evolved into swing music starting around 1933. Swing emerged as the most popular form of music in America, notable for its improvisation and syncopation. Stars like Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, who recorded the first song mentioning the word swing in 1932, along with Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday, achieved great success. Hollywood and fashion influence. Cinema, after the advent of sound in 1927, was a major form of entertainment. The musical genre became the most popular because it showcased the new sound technology well. The two highest-grossing films of the decade were Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1937, and Gone with the Wind, 1939. Screen stars became role models for fashion, hairstyles, and makeup. In the movie It Happened One Night, 1934, lead actor Clark Gable did not wear an undershirt beneath his shirt, leading to a drop in sales of that item. Stars like Katharine Hepburn pioneered the introduction of trousers into women's wardrobes. Art and social reality. The Roosevelt administration funded the arts through the WPA Works Progress Administration, enabling artists to continue creating and documenting life. The Art Deco movement reached its peak in North America, notable for its boldness, minimalism, and modernity. Social realism became an important movement, documenting the miserable lives of ordinary people. Photographers like Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans were hired by the government to capture iconic images of the suffering of the poor and migrants, such as the famous photograph, Migrant Mother. In your opinion, can culture truly be a savior during the darkest times? Do you remember any films or radio shows from your grandparents' time that just mentioning the name makes you smile? Let's reminisce together. The Great Solution, the New Deal. Against the backdrop of a dual crisis, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, who took office in 1933, launched the New Deal program. This was a fundamental shift from the laissez-faire, non-intervention economy to increased government management for macroeconomic regulation. Emergency relief and recovery, First New Deal, 1933 to 1934. The first phase focused on the 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. Roosevelt immediately declared a bank holiday, closing banks for 4 days to stop the panicked wave of withdrawals. Subsequently, the government established the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, insuring bank deposits up to $5,000, which helped restore public confidence in the banking system. In 1934, the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, was established to oversee stock transactions. The first program to address the record unemployment was the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC. The CCC hired unemployed, unmarried young men aged 18 to 25. A total of 3 million young men participated in the CCC during its 9 years of operation. They were provided with shelter, clothing, food, and medical care. Each young man received $30 per month, of which $25 was mandatory to be sent home to their family. The CCC was widely supported by the American public and is considered the most popular New Deal program. Additionally, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, AAA of 1933, aimed to provide economic assistance to farmers by paying them subsidies to voluntarily cut production. Thanks to this, farm income increased by over 50% between 1932 and 1935. Building long-term Social Security, Second New Deal, 1935 to 1939. The second phase focused on building a long-term foundation and social safety net. The Works Progress Administration, WPA, was the largest job provider of the era. The WPA launched small-scale projects across the country, building homes, roads, airports, and schools. This agency helped a total of 9 million people until 1943. The most important act was the Social Security Act, SSA of 1935. The SSA created a state-managed welfare system, providing old age assistance, unemployment benefits, and support for the disabled and the poor. This act is considered the foundation of the modern American social welfare system. In addition, the New Deal also protected workers through the National Labor Relations Act, Wagner Act, 1935, protecting the rights of workers to form unions and engage in collective bargaining. The Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, 1938, regulating maximum working hours and minimum wage for most labor groups. Environmental recovery. The government established the Soil Conservation Service in 1935. A series of conservation measures were implemented, including the planting of nearly 30,000 kilometers of trees to reduce wind erosion, the Great Plains Shelter Belt. Thanks to these measures, the amount of soil blown away was reduced by up to 65% by 1938. In the autumn of 1939, rain returned to the Great Plains, ending a decade of drought and dust storms. Iconic works and technical innovations. Even during the difficult years, the New Deal funded infrastructure and technical projects. Major architectural works were completed: the Empire State Building, completed 1931, and the Chrysler Building. The government supported the completion of large projects like the Hoover Dam, built 1931 to 1936, an engineering marvel. Other infrastructure projects partly funded by the New Deal included the San Francisco Bay Bridge, completed 1936, and the Lincoln Tunnel, opened 1937 in New York. In 1935, the Rural Electrification Administration, REA, was established, helping to bring electricity to rural America. In terms of invention, the material nylon was synthesized in the mid-1930s. Aviation technology advanced, and astronomer Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto in 1930. End of the crisis and lasting legacy. Although the New Deal helped millions of people escape unemployment and significantly improved U.S. GDP, it did not entirely end the economic depression. The unemployment rate was still around 14% in 1940. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 officially ended the Great Depression. The war economy boosted industrial production, and millions of unemployed young men were mobilized into the military, helping to alleviate job scarcity. The legacy of the New Deal is permanent. It abolished laissez-faire capitalism and replaced it with state macroeconomic regulation. The core institutions of modern American finance, FDIC, modern social welfare system. This is a story of loss, but above all, it is about courage, rebirth, and an invaluable historical lesson about the necessity of action and faith in the future. Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to share and subscribe to the Back to Yesterday channel so you don't miss other fascinating history stories. See you in the next video.